Thank you, Neha. Thank you, Irfan. Thank you all for coming here. As Irfan said, I had back surgery some weeks ago, so you'll have to excuse me. I can't stand for long periods. It's a great privilege to speak in honor of Asghar Ali engineer, whom I read about and read while growing up intellectually and politically. So I think this is the late 70s and the early 80s. When as Harsh knows, Harsh and I were college contemporaries, and I was then obsessed with playing cricket and nothing else. And so I was oblivious of many things, including the emergency, I'm embarrassed to say, while it was happening in my college. But my awakening came after the emergency, and with, of course, the overthrow of the authoritarian regime and the failed promise of the Janata Party, and so on and so forth. And that's when I started reading Asghar Ali engineer, reading about him, about, as Harsh said, his battles with religious orthodoxy in his own tradition. So when Irfan's invitation came to speak in his honor, I thought I would speak about another religious radical who did not leave his tradition, but sought to improve, refine, rehabilitate it and make it more empathetic, just, humane. So that is my talk, Gandhi's faith and ours. Now, when you think of faith, a belief in something beyond the human spirit, for many politicians, faith does not matter. Winston Churchill, for example, what kind of Christian he was is irrelevant. If you look at another among Gandhi's great contemporaries, Charles de Gaulle in France, or even Mao Zedong in China, what kind of religious faith they subscribe to doesn't really matter. But it does with others. George W. Bush, the president who orchestrated the war on Iraq, was once asked, "Who is your favorite philosopher?" And he said, "Jesus Christ." Now you have to take him at his word. You may quarrel. There were Americans who quarreled with his interpretation of Jesus Christ. To take another American from an earlier period than Bush, a generation before Bush, Martin Luther King, if you asked him, "Who is your favorite philosopher?" he is also likely to answer Jesus Christ, but his Jesus Christ was rather different from George W. Bush's Jesus Christ. But the point is, for some political activists, faith does not matter at all, and for some it matters in very different ways. And to Gandhi, faith mattered. And what precisely his faith was is what I shall try to do in the course of my talk. Now, Gandhi was born in 1869. Now, as a historian, if I was to take one's mind back to the time of Gandhi's birth, in Europe, this is a time of increasing skepticism about religion. It's just 10 years after Darwin has published The Origin of Species, which blows a hole in the idea that God created the earth, And among intellectuals too, among European intellectuals, there was skepticism about religion. People were embracing reason, rationalism, to the extent that the great British writer Thomas Hardy wrote a poem called God's Funeral. So for the thinking classes of England and Western Europe, at the time as Gandhi was coming into adulthood, this was a time of, you could say, atheism or skepticism about religion. And on the other hand, in Asia and Africa, it was a time of aggressive religious fundamentalism. So you had, of course, with the growth of the European empires, Christian missionaries trying to claim the heathen for Christianity. You had also the spread of missionary Islam in Africa. And you had in India, for example, the counter-reaction of the Arya Samaj, which was a reclaim everyone for Hinduism. So aggressive religious fundamentalism was coexisting with atheism in the late 19th century. And the distinctiveness of Gandhi's views from then till his death was he was not an atheist, and yet he was not a religious dogmatist either. Now, when one speaks of Gandhi's religious thought, Gandhi's faith, there are four aspects one should consider, and I'll kind of outline these four aspects to you. The first are the intellectual influences on him. You know, what shaped his faith? What shaped his particular interpretation of Hinduism? Who, not what, who, but also who and what. So the intellectual influences, then the personal influences. That would be the second aspect. The third would be his religious philosophy. What was his broader religious philosophy? What you may call theology. What was his religious philosophy? I like to argue that Gandhi was a theological pluralist. I'll explain what that means. And finally, the role of faith and belief in the Indian freedom struggle. So there are four aspects: the intellectual or moral influences on Gandhi. Who were his mentors? Who was he seeking? You know, like several people on this podium see Gandhi as their anchor. Who was as their moral anchor? Who was Gandhi seeing as his anchor? That's the first. The second is, what was his faith? The third is, what was his philosophy of faith? And the fourth is, how did his practice and philosophy of faith relate to the, you could say, the politics of India and the freedom struggle at the time? And I'll explain each of these, and then I'll carry on from there. The first, the formative influences on him. Now, on his religious thought, not on his economic thought, or not on his, ideas on caste or gender or whatever, but on his religious thought. The first key influence was a Jain thinker called Ramchandra. Gandhi met him in 1891 when he is coming back from London after having studied law. And the fact that his mother has died has been kept from him. His father had died several years ago, and he's told at once, shortly after he comes, that his mother has died, and he was devoted to his mother. And this is the time he meets Ramchandra Bhai, who was a relative of a friend of his, actually an extraordinary man called Pranjivan Mehta, who's largely written out of history books, who was one of Gandhi's closest associates and benefactors in South Africa and in England. Anyway, so he meets Ramchandra Bhai, and Ramchandra Bhai is a Jain thinker who says, who introduces him to the idea of ahimsa, and also to the idea of kind of, how do I put it, thinking empathetically about other religions. So Ramchandra Bhai says, you are a Hindu, I am a Jain, but we can still have a conversation, on a basis of equality. And you learn more about my Jainism by talking to me, and I learn more about your Hinduism. Likewise, and India was always, from the beginning, a multi-religious country. The Kerala, for example, has had Christians and Muslims for almost 2,000 years. And of course, there are Sikhs and Jains and Parsis and Buddhists and so on. And Ramchandra Bhai kind of gave Gandhi the analogy, interesting analogy. Think of religion as different railway compartments. So all of you have traveled by Indian Railways, and all of you, like me, when I would travel by train, you would be bored and you take a walk all down the corridors and through coach A, coach B, coach C, coach D. And Ramchandra Bhai told Gandhi, think of, you're in coach A, that is your Hinduism. Coach B is Jains, coach C is Christians, coach D is Muslims. You go through all of them and so कि क्या हो रहा है, कौन है, क्या सोच रहे हैं, मेरे जैसे सोच रहे हैं कि अलग सोच रहे हैं, and you will then try and get a sense of, people may be different, but you can still relate to them. So that was Ramchandra Bhai, the first whom he met when he comes back from London in his early 20s. And in many ways, Gandhi continues to regard him as his mentor. The second was his political mentor. So Ramchandra Bhai was his spiritual mentor. His political mentor was Gopal Krishna Gokhale, who was absolutely committed to Hindu-Muslim harmony in the public sphere. Gokhale was a quite remarkable man, now tragically forgotten, and no one talks about him. I don't think any of the extraordinary courageous students who protested in Delhi have really heard of heard of Gokhale, which is possibly the fault of us historians. We haven't written about him. But Gokhale was, I mean, he taught Gandhi many things. He alerted Gandhi to the injustice of untouchability too, but also the Hindu-Muslim harmony. You know, unlike Gokhale's great rival Tilak, who was, you know, really much more of a, how put it, passionate, believing Hindu who did not really care very much who did not see that building Hindu-Muslim relations, building cooperative, compatible relations between India's two largest religious communities required patience and tact. It could not be done overnight. So the importance of Hindu-Muslim harmony comes from Gokhale in the public sphere. Raichan influences him spiritually. And thirdly, there is Tolstoy. Now, Gandhi never met Tolstoy. I mean, he met Raichan, he had met Gokhale many times. Gokhale went to see him in South Africa, but he never met Tolstoy. And Tolstoy meant a great deal to Gandhi. Not Tolstoy's novels, by the way. There is no evidence that Tolstoy read, there is no evidence, concrete evidence, that Gandhi read either of Tolstoy's two great novels, War and Peace or Anna Karenina. And during the pandemic, when we were all at home, I set myself a challenge. I will read War and Peace and Anna Karenina, partly because I hadn't, partly because Gandhi hadn't either. And it was an enormously enriching experience. These are the two of the great novels of the 19th century. You know, George Eliot's Middlemarch would be probably the third. So Gandhi did not read Tolstoy's novels, but he read his non-fiction. Tolstoy was a little bit like how Gandhi's career mirrors or emulates Tolstoy's career. Professional career is very interesting. Tolstoy was the most successful writer of his age who gave it up to cultivate the inner life and to work with his peasants. Gandhi was the most successful Indian lawyer in South Africa who gave it up to become an activist. That's well known. Also, Tolstoy's obsession with celibacy became Gandhi's obsession with celibacy. But the interesting point of view from interesting thing from the point of view of Gandhi's religious thought is the influence of him on Tolstoy's book, The Kingdom of God is Within You. Now, the kingdom of God is within me, and within Purushottam, and within Harsh, and within Irfan, and within all of you here. What does that mean? You will find your own path to God. You don't need a mullah, a Shahi Imam, a Shankaracharya, a Archbishop, none of those. You will find your own path to God, which means the hierarchy of religions. Asghar Ali engineer did not need the Sayyidina to tell him what kind of Muslim you are. Now, this is what Gandhi gets from Tolstoy. And what is interesting to a biographer is if you look, these three come in order. So there is Raichand's Bhai, there is Gokhale, and then there is Tolstoy. These are his three, you could say, intellectual influences. The first is a fellow Gujarati. The second is a non-Gujarati but an Indian. And the third is a non-Indian. So Gandhi is expanding his, you could say he's becoming more and more open and less xenophobic as he's growing in terms of these three influences. So that's the intellectual influences on Gandhi's view of faith. Next, I come to his personal practice. Now, I believe that Gandhi was transformed by living outside India. So he goes as a young law student, and he was transformed by accident. His father's death allowed him to go to London because the father would have not encouraged him to go to London. He was able to persuade his mother, and in most Indian families of that time and possibly this time, the mother is more susceptible to pleading and beseeching by the child than the father is. And certainly in Gandhi's case, the father was a stern patriarch who would have said, the father was the Diwan of Rajkot. He would have told Gandhi, become a state servant like me. So the father's death is an accident that allows him to go to London. But when he goes to London, I mean, there are many ways in which his experience overseas in his early 20s transforms him. One of the ways is that he sees women as independent agents. You know, in Kathiawar, where he grew up, women were submissive, subservient, submissive, always in inferior domestic roles. Here his landlady is a woman, telling him where you can sit, where you can have a bath, where you can't have a bath, what you must pay, when you must pay. She's an independent agent. But that's not relevant. This is not relevant to our talk today. But there he meets Christians, gets interested in their faith, talks to them about Christianity, and shares a room with a Christian. A fellow vegetarian called Josiah Oldfield, who is one of Gandhi's first English friend, the first of many English friends he makes, and he shares a home with him. Now, if Gandhi had stayed in Kathiawar or within India, given how conservative Indian society was then and still is, you know, it would be very hard for him to actually have that kind of intimate domestic friendship with a Christian. Then he comes back to India with his law degree, tries to make a living as a lawyer and fails. And that is the second stroke of luck. He practiced in the Bombay High Court, where he was for a year and a bit a briefless barrister. Now, you know the Bombay High Court, it's a magnificent building in Gothic Bombay, not far from the Oval. And I pass it often because the Maharashtra State Archives are right next to the Bombay High Court. And in the course of my work on Gandhi, whenever I passed the High Court, I offered a silent prayer for Gandhi's failure at the High Court. Because had he not failed, none of you would have heard of him. His failure and the offer to rebuild his career by solving a dispute, a commercial dispute in South Africa, saves him. Now, this commercial dispute is between two Gujarati cousins, and who need in order to broker a compromise between them, they need someone who understands the law, the British law, which applied in South Africa, and you can read Gujarati. Now, Gandhi fitted the bill, so he goes there, and the person who invites him, as many of you know, is called Dada Abdullah. He takes a ship in October 1893, aged only 24, to South Africa, gets off the ship at Durban, is met by Dada Abdullah, and goes to Dada Abdullah's house. Now, Gandhi doesn't talk about it, but a Hindu and a Muslim, a Hindu baniya, vegetarian baniya, staying in a Gujarati Muslim non-vegetarian businessman's house would have been inconceivable anywhere in Gujarat. Then, of course, he starts then he goes to Johannesburg. So he stays from 1893 to 1901 in Durban. Then he comes back to India for a couple of years, goes back, and now he's based in Johannesburg. Durban is on the South African coast. Johannesburg is inland. And there, his closest friend is a Jew called Henry Pollack, whom he meets in a vegetarian restaurant, just as he met Josiah Oldfield in a vegetarian restaurant in London. And they become friends. And there's some very human aspects to this friendship. Henry Pollack is a British Jew. He grew up in London, where he fell in love with a woman called Millie Graham, who happened to be Christian. And Pollack's parents were very conservative. They did not want him to marry outside the faith. So they said, tum South Africa mein jaake naukri karo. Your uncle is there, go and work with him. So he meets Gandhi in this vegetarian restaurant and pours out his woes to Gandhi. Why are you here? I'm here. Gandhi says, I'm here because I'm helping the Indians in their legal cases. Why are you here? Oh, my parents said, you can't marry this guy, you have to go far away. You'll be cured of your love for this Christian girl if you go a million miles away. And Gandhi says, oh really? But that's not good. I will write to your parents. So Gandhi writes to the parents, but Millie persuades them. Millie comes to join Henry, is married in the Johannesburg magistrate's court with a Christian girl, marries a Jewish boy, Christian woman, marries a Jewish man. with Gandhi, the Hindu, as the witness. Now, after that, they share a home. Now, this is Gandhi and Kasturba share a home with an English couple. Now, again, this is radically unprecedented. Johannesburg was one of the most racist countries of the time. In Bombay in 1905, can you imagine an English couple and an Indian couple sharing a home with three religions there, Jewish, Christian, and Hindu? So, his personal experiences, his personal practice, his meeting Christians in London, his meeting Christians and Jews, and then of course the participation in the satyagrahas of non-Hindus. So when Gandhi decides to form the Natal Indian Congress, and later the Transvaal Indian Congress, to fight for the rights of the Indian diaspora in South Africa, the first funder is a Parsi, known as Parsi Rustamji. He was Jivanji Gorkundu Rustamji, known as Parsi Rustamji. So the first political benefactor is a Parsi. So the satyagraha starts in 1907, and because Gandhi is a Gujarati Baniya, many fellow Gujarati Baniyas come to join the movement. They go to jail, but after one spell they say enough, bahut ho gaya, we are going back to our business. And when Gandhi tries to revive the satyagraha, because the laws have not been repealed, it is a Muslim called Ahmad Kachalia who is the first volunteer, the first and the bravest volunteer. And incidentally, again this is a footnote, but biographers are fascinated by footnotes. Kachalia's two sons, Yusuf and Maulvi Ismail, were very active in the anti-apartheid struggle and friends of Nelson Mandela, close friends, but that is a separate question. So Ahmad Kachalia, A.M. Kachalia, saves the movement by saying, I will go to jail. Later on, Tamils come and say, we will go to jail. So Gandhi is exposed to this, you could say, political camaraderie and solidarity between Hindus and Muslims and Parsis, where all are subject, because they are brown-skinned, to the same racial discrimination, but have previously lived in separate compartments, and they joined together. And of course, as I said, Kachalia is a great hero of the satyagraha, but several of the meetings are held in the Hamidiya Mosque in Johannesburg. So they are meetings of Hindus, Parsis, and Muslims in the Hamidiya Mosque planning their next satyagraha. And that famous burning of the passes in a bonfire is actually outside the Hamidiya Mosque in Johannesburg, which still exists and which I had the privilege of visiting 100 years after that satyagraha. So that is Gandhi's experience. From his youth, I mean, just think, it is still in the India of 2026. Young people would probably find it difficult to cultivate friendships across caste boundaries, gender boundaries, religious boundaries. But Gandhi was, in a sense, fortunate, because his life in London and South Africa enabled him to recognize early on the value and virtue of having friends and comrades and colleagues who did not belong to your own religion. And this is especially the case in South Africa, as I mentioned, where he had Jewish, Parsi, Muslim and Christian friends. In his last days in South Africa, he met C.F. Andrews, who had been sent by Gokhale to mediate between the Indians and the imperial authorities. And Andrews became Gandhi's closest friend. You know, Andrews met Gandhi in 1914. Till he died in 1940, Gandhi had no closer friend than this English Anglican priest. And again, if I may, offer a biographer's, you could say, tippani, footnote, or anecdote. If you admired Gandhi, you called him Gandhiji or Bapu. Even today, many people refer to him as Gandhiji in everyday conversation. His closest associates like Jawaharlal Nehru and Vallabhbhai Patel called him Bapu. So Gandhiji or Bapu, if you admired him. If you disliked him, which is also quite common, you called him Mr. Gandhi or MK Gandhi. So the communists and the Ambedkarites never called him Bapu or Gandhiji. It was always Mr. Gandhi or MK Gandhi, which is fine. I mean, a public figure is there to be admired and to be disliked. So, but in his adult life, so far as I can gather, the only person who called Gandhi by his first name, Mohan, was an English Christian priest. So they were Mohan and Charlie to one another. Now, one last, on these personal friendships, one last biographer's anecdote. One of Gandhi's less known admirers, but a man remarkable in his own right, like many of Gandhi's less known admirers were, was a man called G. Ramchandra Rao, known as Gora. He was a Gandhian social worker who was based in Andhra Pradesh, not far from Vijayawada, and he promoted Khadi and the abolition of untouchability and Hindu-Muslim harmony. So all Gandhian causes, but he was an atheist. So he had convinced himself through his reading that is all this is rubbish, you know, to believe in some mystical being up there or whatever religion or no, or even interfaith is all rubbish. He was a radical atheist. And he wrote a lovely pamphlet which you'll get online, which is called An Atheist with Gandhi, which is his conversations with Gandhi. Now, what Gora did in those conversations, quite late. You know, Gandhi, very early, Gandhi, as you know, he called his autobiography, My Experiments with Truth. Now, some of the people who are currently ruining us, more than one, I have a title for their autobiography, My Experiments with Untruth. Anyway, be that as it may, Gandhi called his autobiography, My Experiments with Truth. And he coined the slogan, or coined the aphorism to explain his philosophy, God is truth. God is truth. Gora convinced him there is no God. So make it truth is God. Truth is more important than God. So because of his conversation with Gora, Gandhi changed God is truth to truth is God. So I have told you about the influences on him. I have come next to his personal interaction with people of different faith, including no faith at all like Gora. Now I come to his religious philosophy. How did Gandhi view his own religion in relation to others? Now, Gandhi was not a scholar like Purushottam or me. He didn't write books. He didn't have the time to, you know, sit in his and contemplate. So you have to deduce his religious philosophy through different fragments of his writings. And from what I can see, there are kind of, you could say, 5 aspects to Gandhi's religious philosophy. First, he rejected the idea that there was one privileged God, part to God, that only Hindus have it or only Muslims have it, or only the Pujari has it or only the Imam has it. Second, he believed all religious traditions were a mixture of truth and error. Very early on, you know, again, in 1895, when he was in South Africa, it's a racist country where the rulers claim to be Christians and swear by the Bible, but you see how un-Christian their behavior is. And he visits a Trappist monastery, a monastery of Christian monks who live very simply, who live very austerely, who welcome Gandhi, and contrasting the behavior of the Trappist monks with the white Christian rulers of South Africa. Gandhi says, a religion may be devilish or divine depending on what its practitioners make it to be. I mean, it's a most powerful and you could say truthful statement, devilish or divine. So that was the second thing. Now, thirdly, Gandhi rejected conversion and missionary work because he believed, fourthly, that you stick to your religion in which you are born and seek to rid it of its imperfections and injustices. Make your religion more divine and less devilish. Now, in the case of his own Hinduism, he understood through everyday experience for traveling across India that his own inherited Hinduism was deeply flawed through its practice of untouchability and its denial of equality to women. So he made it a lifelong campaign to end untouchability. You know, and there are many aspects of his campaign against untouchability which tragically have been obscured in recent writings on the subject. But just to refresh our memory, from 1919, 4 years after he returns from South Africa, Gandhi says untouchability is a sin. In 1920-21, he says those who practice untouchability are the general dyers of Hinduism. You know, that is the analogy he uses. So that's one aspect of his attempt to rid Hinduism of its imperfections and untouchability. And the second aspect is to bring women into public life. You know, because of Gandhi, largely because of Gandhi's emphasis on women playing a part in public life, Sarojini Naidu becomes president of the Congress in 1925 of India's largest political party at a time when no Western political party had women even as head of the local council. So that's the fourth aspect of his work. Stay within your religion, make it more open to engagement with the modern world. You know, more egalitarian, more empathetic, more just, more concerned about the less privileged members of your own faith community, in the case of Hinduism, particularly untouchables and women. And finally, Gandhi encouraged interfaith dialogue. I mean, he had all these friends, and he, as I said, he exchanged ideas with them. And he believed, I have broadened my Hinduism. He said, this is a direct quote, I have broadened my Hinduism by loving other religions as my own. So it's like seeing your faith in the mirror of another faith. And as part of this interfaith dialogue, one of Gandhi's great innovations was the interfaith prayer meeting in his ashram. You know, where under the open sky, one of his Christian disciples was kicked out by the church and wrote to Gandhi, said, what do I do? This person was a priest, and the bishop was so upset by his unorthodox views, he delicensed him. And this man remained a believing Christian, but he could not go to church, sort of like Asghar Ali engineer. And he wrote to Gandhi, and Gandhi said, you don't have to go to church. You know, your pulpit is the soil on the ground. Your altar is the open sky. You can still be a Christian without ever going to church. Right. And so this interfaith conversation, I think, helped Gandhi a great deal. I have a long quote which maybe I won't read for shortage of time, but if okay, thank you. It's a wonderful quote. It's from an unpublished memoir by his Jewish friend Henry Pollack, whom I mentioned. It's from an unpublished memoir I found in the library of Rhodes House in Oxford, where Pollack is remembering his days with Gandhi in South Africa, and he writes, I quote, religion for Gandhi implied a mighty and all-embracing tolerance. Hindu by birth, he regards all men, this is the gendered language of the time, so all men and women, Mohammedans, Christians, Zoroastrians, Jews, Buddhists, Confucians, as spiritual brothers. He makes no difference amongst them, recognizing that all faiths lead to salvation, that all are ways of viewing God, and that in their relation to each other, men and women are fellow human beings first, and followers of creeds afterwards. Hence it is that men of all faith, and even of none, are his devoted friends. Now, this is not hyperbole or exaggeration. The interlocutors in Gandhi's interfaith journey included Christian, Jews, Parsis, Muslims, Jains, Buddhists, and of course other Hindus. And it's impossible to think of any other public figure in any country at any time in history, major public figure, who had so many friends across religious boundaries. Now, I've given an outline of Gandhi's religious philosophy. Now I come to the practical consequences of Gandhi's religious philosophy. For most of us, our faith, I've called this lecture Gandhi's Faith and Ours. For most of us, our faith is of relevance to us, to our family, to our friends. But Gandhi claimed to be the leader of a nationwide movement to free India from British rule. So his faith became relevant to all other Indians, the 300 million Indians at the time. And how did Gandhi's religious ideas resonate with other strands in the India of the day? There were three major religious groupings that opposed Gandhi's views. The first were the secular socialists, who saw Gandhi's invocation of faith as a dangerous superstition. M.N. Roy, one of his early Marxist critics, wrote, "While Bolshevism forges ahead, Gandhiism gropes in the dark, spinning out ethical and religious dogmas that prevent the masses from developing the will to fight for freedom." So that was the first kind of attack on Gandhi by secular socialists. It's a bakwas, it is a reactionary medieval rubbish. The second group who criticized Gandhi's attitude to faith were Muslim politicians who said Gandhi's talk of interfaith dialogue is all humbug. It's a disguise for Hindu domination. And these politicians, led by the brilliant strategist Muhammad Ali Jinnah, ultimately succeeded in carving out British India into two separate and opposed countries, Pakistan. The third opponents of Gandhi's religious philosophy were the radicals on his own side, who saw his talk of interfaith dialogue as a denial of the Hindu essence of the Indian nation. This is the tradition of the RSS and of Nathuram Godse, who belonged to the RSS. And Godse said Gandhi was the father of Pakistan. Gandhi's experiments were at the expense of Hindus, and as a justification for killing Gandhi, he said, Indian politics in the absence of Gandhi will be able to retaliate and be more powerful. Now, there's a paradox. Jinnah and the Muslim separatists said Gandhi is not a Hindu, is too much of a Hindu. So the Muslim League said Gandhi is too much of a Hindu. The Godse and the RSS said Gandhi is not enough of a Hindu. Now, so clearly it's a very interesting paradox. Now, Gandhi, despite Gandhi's best efforts, India was partitioned. And how did Gandhi react? Now, all of you know, and I won't go into it, his pilgrimage for peace in Noakhali, which Harsh mentioned, his fast in Calcutta and in Delhi, which stopped the violence. I'm just going to quote, before I come to the last part of my talk, I'm just going to quote a report on Gandhi's last fast, which was in Delhi between the 13th and 18th of January 1948, and which ended when the leaders of all the communities in Delhi, Hindu, Muslims and Sikhs, signed a statement pledging that they would respect one another and not create harm or violence to any one of the other community. Now, while he was on fast, we are here in Lutyens, Delhi. The fast was in what was then called Birla House, which is now Gandhi Smriti, which is probably a kilometer away as the crow flies. Back then, in January 1948, opposite Birla House was the British High Commission. What is now Raksha Bhavan, the National Defence College, was the British High Commission. And I found a report in the UK National Archives in Kew, written while Gandhi is on fast, by the British High Commissioner back to London, where he says, this is about, it's a theme that will touch both Purushottam and Harsh deeply. This is what he says about Gandhi's last fast. He's this British High Commissioner. Day in and day out too, Muslims of all classes of society, that is Delhi Muslims of all classes of society, many of whom had suffered personal bereavements in the recent disturbances, came to invoke Gandhi's help. Normally too fearful even to leave their homes, they came to him because they had learned and believed that he had their interests at heart and was the only real force in the Indian Union capable of preventing them from destruction. Now, so much for Gandhi, and now we have come to the end of his life. Now I spent maybe about 10, maximum 15 minutes on India, the status of interfaith harmony and alas interfaith disharmony after Gandhi's death. But the first thing I'd like to say in this context is that Gandhi's, when it came to the question of equal rights for minorities in India that had been divided on the basis of religion, The most steadfast and committed follower of Mahatma Gandhi was the Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. Now, this is sometimes not recognized because Nehru departed from Gandhi in other respects like his economic policy and so on. But when it came to India being a secular state, India being a land where, as Harsh said, everyone has an equal right to belong, Nehru, and Purushottam of course has written on Nehru extensively, Nehru was on the same side as Gandhi. And I'm going to give you two quotations from Nehru. The first is a letter he wrote to chief ministers on 15th October 1947, where he says, "We have a Muslim minority who are so large in numbers that they cannot, even if they want to, go anywhere else. Whatever the provocation from Pakistan and whatever the indignities and horrors inflicted on non-Muslims there, we have to deal with this minority in a civilized manner. We must give them security and the rights of citizens in a democratic state." This is the Prime Minister writing to the Chief Minister of every state saying, this is our commitment. Whatever the provocation from Pakistan, whatever the indignities they commit on their minorities, we will give our minorities equal rights in our state. And of course, there's many speeches of Nehru like this and letters, but I'll just mention one. This is 2nd October 1951, Gandhi's birth anniversary. And at this time, Nehru is campaigning for a general election. And he's campaigning, one of his platforms is Hindu-Muslim harmony, while campaigning for a general election. You can see, how strikingly different this is from recent campaigning by prime ministers before general elections. So this is 2nd October 1951. Nehru tells an audience, actually in Delhi, Gandhi's message was first of all the unity of India and the ability to work together irrespective of caste and creed. And after referring several times that Hindu communalism posed to the unity that Gandhi had fought for, Nehru issues a ringing declaration on behalf of himself. I quote, Nehru says, "I am prepared to come to an agreement with anyone except any such individual, an Indian, who raises a hand against another Indian in the name of religion. I shall fight him to the very end." Move on to 1953. He is writing to the chief ministers again, Nehru. He says, "I urge you to create a sense of partnership in every group and individual in the country, a sense of being a full sharer in the benefits and opportunities that are offered." And he again tells the chief ministers, "It is always the duty and obligation of the majority to win the goodwill of the minorities by fair and even generous treatment." Now, Nehru becomes Prime Minister in 1947. The first communal riot, proper communal riot after Gandhi's death, is 1963, which is a very complicated affair. There is the theft of a hair of the Prophet from Hazrat Bal Mosque, which sparks riots in East Pakistan against the Hindu minorities, which spill over into Bengal and Orissa and also to Jabalpur. But not all, indeed possibly not even many of Nehru's chief ministers, not all or possibly not even many of Nehru's chief ministers and cabinet ministers shared his total commitment to interfaith harmony. There were virtually no major riots so long as Nehru was prime minister. And of course, the riots really start in the 70s and the 80s, and then we have the demolition of the Babri Masjid, and of course things that people on this podium have written about. And I won't go into the long, complicated story of the rise of the BJP and Hindutva and why they won 3 successive elections. I mean, I've written about it elsewhere, so have many others. But I'll just make a few concluding remarks. Or maybe I'll say a few things about, if you look at, try to understand what are the reasons for the rise to political power and ideological and institutional hegemony of Hindutva, the BJP and the RSS. There are 4 or 5 factors. One is obviously their commitment, their ideological, their organizational strength. As the great Irish poet W.B. Yeats said about his own country, "The best lack all conviction, the worst are full of passionate intensity." So The worst are full of passionate intensity. You know, in many contexts, the worst have the zeal, the dogma, the energy, the commitment, the willingness to sacrifice. That's one reason. And then possibly the best lack all conviction. I would say, in many ways, the post-Nehru Congress, particularly Rajiv Gandhi, let down Nehru, and we can talk about that, whether it's overturning the Shah Banu judgment, or it's opening the locks of the Ayodhya temple, or indeed it is starting his 1989 campaign from Ayodhya. So that again is well documented. Not so well documented is how the post-Gandhian, so if the post-Nehru Congress let down Nehru, the post-Gandhi Gandhians let down Gandhi. You know, and again, one figure who is extremely culpable here is Vinoba Bhave, you know, who never really took up issues like the abolition of untouchability or Hindu-Muslim harmony all through the 50s and the 60s, when these sentiments had to be cultivated, deepened, and so on. Another reason for the rise of Hindutva is obviously the broader regional and global context. We live in a region in which Pakistan and Bangladesh are Islamic majoritarian states, where Hindus and Sikhs and Buddhists are treated as second-class citizens. We also live in a region where among our neighbors are Myanmar and Sri Lanka, which are Buddhist majoritarian states, where Muslims particularly, but also in the case of Sri Lanka, Hindus are treated as second-class citizens. And religious fundamentalisms are rivalrous and competitive. That's clearly also one reason. So there's a complex of factors that has brought us to the pass in which we are. But as I come to my concluding comments, I'm just going to throw open a couple of questions, not give you answers, because I'm a scholar, really not an activist. I believe in analysis. I'm not equipped to prescribe. But still, to give a very kind of broad brush sense of what are the alternatives before us. How can we combat Hindutva? And I would say that from my studies of Gandhi and Gandhi's faith, and also the faith of his closest disciples, I would very broadly argue that in combating Hindutva, in restoring the pluralistic ideals and pluralistic and inclusive ideals of our constitution, we need to build on the legacy of Gandhi both. Now, there are young people in this room, but some of the people of our generation who will remember a time in the late 80s, around when the BJP was rising, when some intellectuals tried to oppose Gandhi to Nehru, saying there is a Nehruvian secularism that is flawed and a Gandhian secularism which is somehow superior. And I always had problems with that. And I believe that we need to build on the legacy of Gandhi and Nehru, both, albeit in different ways and in different spheres of society. From Gandhi, we have to cultivate pluralism, friendship, tolerance, understanding at the level of everyday life, in what we may call civil society. And to my left are two sterling practitioners of cultivating friendship and tolerance and interfaith harmony in civil society. I mean, Purushottam is one of the founders of the Sampradayikta Virodhi Andolan, which particularly in the decade of the 90s did extraordinary work. And if Purushottam will allow me to say it, you know, there were many people in the SVA, but two of the principal people was this Bania from Gwalior, and a Christian, a believing Christian, lapsed Marxist called Dilip Simian, who is a great hero to all of us, and may he long continue to inspire us. So that was one experiment. More recently, of course, you have Harsh and his exemplary work, his work of him and his colleagues in Karwan-e-Mohabbat. So at the level of civil society, you take from Gandhi. But at the level of the state, you take from Nehru. The state has to be impartial, and, you know, but because the state has the wherewithal to stop a criminal riot. A riot will only take place if the law and order machinery allows it. And the law and order machinery, the orders don't come from the commissioner of police, they come from the home minister or the prime minister, or home minister or chief minister, depending on the state. And In my personal experience, I'll just give you a couple of examples. You know, I have seen chief ministers. I've also seen prime ministers. I've not seen. I have researched a prime minister, now completely forgotten, who was totally Nehruvian in his attitude to secularism and pluralism. His name was Lal Bahadur Shastri. In 1965, when India was at war against Pakistan, Lal Bahadur Shastri gave a speech in the Ram Leela Maidan while the war was going on. And from a podium like this, he said, "To my left is Mir Mushtaq Ahmed, who was then president of the Delhi Pradesh Congress. To my right is Frank Antony, who was a famous Anglo-Indian lawyer and member of the Constituent Assembly." He said, "To my left is Mir Mushtaq Ahmed, to my right is Frank Antony. That is what makes us different from Pakistan." Right. So, maybe no prime minister since then has actually matched Nehru or Shastri in this total commitment, but some chief ministers have. I happen to be in Calcutta when Indira Gandhi was assassinated. I was then completing my PhD. I was about to take up my first job. And I grew up, Harshmandar is a Sikh, so he will know this. I grew up in a town which was in which Sikhs were a very important community, Dehradun. You know, Dehradun was actually a town founded by a dissident Sikh sect led by Guru Ram Rai, and it was given, you could say, its present character and its zeal, zest and energy by Sikh migrants after partition. So I grew up in a town surrounded by Sikhs in school and college and on the playing field, and I was in Calcutta, you know, just grieving for what is happening here. My friends, including Dilip Simian and others, were working heroically, and I was just thinking, kya ho raha hai? In Calcutta, they were then in 1984, roughly about 40,000 Sikhs, of which a majority were taxi drivers identified by their turban. Jyoti Basu, on the night Indira Gandhi was killed, Jyoti Basu was in Bardhaman, which was about 2 or 3 hours away from Calcutta. He came back immediately and he issued orders, not a single Sikh will be harmed. And that was Calcutta on 1st, 2nd, 3rd November. You know, all identifiable by their turban, not living where they could organize self-defense. And Jyoti Basu actually had been in Calcutta during Gandhiji's fast there in September and visited him. That's one example. The second example is more recent, and it's from the state I currently live in, Bangalore. Last year, 2025, a Kannada writer, a Kannada woman writer, Banu Mushtaq, won the International Booker Prize for her short stories. And one of the great religious, quasi-religious, you could call cultural festivals you could say the biggest cultural festival in Karnataka is the Mysore Dasara, which happens, and you go to the Chamundi temple, which is on top, and you inaugurate it. And every year there are 3 dignitaries present: the erstwhile Maharaja, jo bhi hai descendant, the chief minister, and one person, usually a writer from civil society. You know, Purushottam will be interested in this factor, so will Apurvanand, who was here, that apart from Hindi, which is of course a language spoken by maybe 40% of India now, the language that has the most Gyanpith winners is Kannada, which are 9. And they revere their writers. So, Siddaramaiah said, our writer Banu Mushtaq has got international acclaim. She will inaugurate the Dasara festival. And immediately, Mysore itself is now become a god of the BJP. The MP is a BJP guy. He used to be a rabble rouser called Pratap Simha. Now there is the Maharaja descendants, and this organized a huge protest. And Siddaramaiah stayed firm. He said, she will do it. And then he pointed out that about 25 years earlier, another great Kannada writer, Nisar Ahmed, had inaugurated the festival. And indeed, long before that, from 1924 to 1941, the Diwan of Mysore was Sir Misra Ismail, who was always present at the festival. Now, I can tell you that not all chief ministers of the Congress party would have stood firm like that. Right. So, that is in a sense, what we need. We need at the level of civil society to deepen, to avow, uphold, deepen, take forward the legacy of Gandhi. At the level of the state, I think we need to uphold with the constitutional principles which someone like Jawaharlal Nehru, not always successfully, but always honestly and honorably tried to uphold. Thank you.